Hi, welcome to Diabetes, Carb Counting and the Libre. My name's Barry, I've been diabetic for 19 years, been carb counting for most of that, but I've only just started to use the Libre. I would say it's life changing, and with that I have a goal of getting my blood glucose 100% on target for 24 hours. I would like to share with you how I go about doing that and let you know if I manage to achieve it. So in order to carb count, there are a few things you need to be able to do, which I'm going to explain to you in this video. Now the first thing, you need to know how to calculate your carb to insulin ratio. You only need to do this once and then you can just tweak it. The second thing is how to calculate your correction dose, and again, you can calculate this once and then it's just a case of tweaking it. The third thing is how to calculate the carb content in the food that you're eating, and you'll have to do this every single time. Lastly, once you have these three pieces of information, you need to know how to calculate your insulin dose. Now the calculations will be explained to you in this video, but you can use a spreadsheet or there are apps available to help you do this. Right, so I'm going to talk about how I calculated my insulin to carb ratio. The first thing I needed to do was to work out exactly how much insulin I was taking each day. So if you have a look at the table on my left, you'll see that over a 4-day period I recorded exactly how much insulin I was taking, and the bottom row in bold will show you my total dose for each day. So on day 1 I took 36.5 units of insulin, on day 2 36.5 again, day 3 37, and day 4 took 34.5 units. Once I had recorded that, I could then work out my average daily dose. So to do this, I added up each daily dose and divided it by 4. The reason I divided by 4 was because I did it over a 4-day period. So for me, that worked out that my average daily dose was 36.1 units of insulin per day. Once I had that information, I could then work out my insulin to carb ratio. And to do that, you simply divide your average daily dose by 50. So for me, that was 36.1 divided by 50, or 0.72 units of insulin per 10 grams of carbohydrate. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you how I work out the carb content of the food that I eat. If I'm eating something simple like a pot noodle, this is easy and can be read straight off of the label. Otherwise it might be a little bit more complicated and you'll have to calculate it as follows. The first thing you need to do is to weigh your food. So using my kitchen scales every morning, I weigh out 50 grams of cereal. The second thing I do is I read the label with the nutritional information on it. On there you can find out how many carbohydrates there are per 100 grams of that food. The third thing I do is the calculation. So the box says there is 69 grams of carbs per 100 grams of cereal, and I'm eating 50 grams of this cereal. I now need to use the equation carb intake is equal to the mass eaten in grams multiplied by the carbs per 100 grams divided by 100. So in this example, it's 50 multiplied by 69 divided by 100, which is equal to 34.5 grams of carbs. This has to be done for each individual piece of food that you are eating. So now I need to calculate how much insulin to take, and I call this my carbohydrate insulin dose. My carbohydrate insulin dose is equal to the amount of carbs I have eaten divided by 10 multiplied by my carb to insulin ratio. So if I go back to my example of the cereal, my carbohydrate insulin dose is equal to 34.5 grams, which is the amount of carbs I ate, divided by 10 multiplied by 0.72. This equates to a carbohydrate insulin dose of 2.48 units. Now because my insulin pen only goes up in 0.5 units, I had to round that up to 2.5 units of insulin. So once I had my carb to insulin ratio, I wanted to check that it was correct. The way I did this was I would measure my blood sugar, I would eat a certain amount of carbs, and then a few hours later, if the carb ratio was correct, my blood sugar should have returned to that level that it was. So if you look at the graph on my left, for example, If my blood sugar was in target and it was at 7, I ate some carbs, took the right amount of insulin, you can see that my blood glucose rose and then dropped and returned back to 7. Or if it was high, let's say 11, it started off at 11, rose and went back down to 11 again. A few things I would say about this. I originally went for a 2-hour time period. That was too short. Novo Rapid that I used lasts for about 3 to 5 hours. So I would do it for a 3-hour period, and I redid this for a 3-hour time period. The second thing you'll see on my chart, the green area represents the acceptable blood glucose level and the horizontal black line is my target. Ideally, I don't want that peak to come out of that green area. So now I want to show you how I got on with testing my carb to insulin ratio. The results are on the table on my left, and if you have a look, the one in the red box is the one that I started off with. So with that one, I started off with a blood glucose of 8.6. I ate 30 grams of carbohydrates, and then using my carb to insulin ratio of 0.72, I worked out that I should have taken 2.2 units of insulin, but I had to round this down to 2. Okay, I then tested my blood sugar 2 hours later and it came out at 7.4. This meant that my blood glucose had decreased by 1.2 over that time period. This told me my carb to insulin ratio was a little bit too high, so I then started to decrease it. In actual fact, the one in green is the one that worked out the best because it produced a change of minus 0.7, which is the closest one to a change of 0. And that was a carb to insulin ratio of 0.68. Just to make the information a little bit clearer, I plotted this in a graph, which you can see now. I've got the insulin to carb ratio on the x-axis and the change of my blood glucose over 2 hours on the y-axis, and I then plotted the trend line, which you can see. And that just kind of reinforces that the best insulin to carb ratio for me was 0.685. So once I've got my carb to insulin ratio, and assuming that is correct, the next step is to work out my correction dose. If you look at the graph below me, the correction dose simply returns a high blood sugar to the correct level. So imagine it starts off at 13, I eat some food and my blood glucose rises and it should drop back down to 13 if my carb insulin is correct. But then what the correction dose does is brings it back down to that level of 7. You can work out your correction dose by simply doing 100 divided by your average daily insulin dose. So for me, that is 100 divided by 36.1, and that is equal to 2.77 millimoles per litre per unit. So basically, each unit of insulin I take will reduce my blood glucose by 2.77 millimoles per litre. Once you've got that information, you need to be able to work out how much insulin to take to bring your glucose back down to 7. The correction dose, the amount of insulin you take, is equal to your current blood glucose, which could be 13, minus your target blood glucose level, which could be 7, divided by your correction dose ratio. So for me, if my blood sugar was 13 and I want to bring it to 7, my correction dose would be 13 minus 7 divided by 2.77, which is equal to 2.16 units of insulin. I would probably round that down to about 2. So once I had my correction ratio, I then needed to check it. And the way I did this is I would compare my 2-hour blood glucose versus my target. And the reason for this is because the idea is your correction dose will bring your high blood glucose back to your target. Okay, so I took lots of readings. There's a sample of them below me. There's only a few, I took a lot more than that. And when I did this, I could see there was a lot of variation. Sometimes my correction dose would work and sometimes it wouldn't. So I then produced another table and I averaged my 2-hour blood glucose difference between that and my target with my correction dose, and you can see that below. And then I also converted that into a chart to make it a bit more visual and easy to see. Now what it kind of shows is that the best correction dose for me, which brought my blood sugar closest to 7, was at either 2.22 or 2.3. Okay, so that's basically saying each unit of insulin will reduce my blood glucose by 2.22 or 2.3 millimoles per litre. So bringing it all together, it's really important now to realise that your total insulin dose will be equal to your carb insulin dose plus your correction insulin dose plus any user adjustment you might make. Now by user adjustment, what I mean is you can change it depending on how much exercise you think you've had or how much you're going to do. Okay, now the other important thing is I don't do these calculations every single time I eat. In fact, I made a spreadsheet that I keep on my mobile phone. All I do is I scan my Libre, put into it my current blood sugar, work out the amount of carbs that I'm eating, and then my phone will do the rest and it will tell me my total insulin dose. And you can see an example of that just next to me. The other really important thing I would like to say is if you have already taken a correction dose within the last 3 hours, do not take another, because that insulin is probably still going to be active in your body. So don't take too many correction doses close together. So now it's time for a quick summary. Hopefully by watching this video you have learned how to calculate your average daily insulin intake, how to calculate your carbohydrate to insulin ratio, how to calculate the carbohydrate content of food, how to calculate the amount of insulin to take based on the carbohydrate content, how to calculate the correction dose ratio, how to calculate your correction dose if your blood sugar is high, and finally, how to calculate your total insulin dose. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it and found it useful, and if you have, please don't forget to like and subscribe.